How to Train Your Murs. Written by JUBE514 and SalParadiseLost. Read to you by Evie is Evil. Chapter 2. This specific chapter is written by SalParadiseLost. Now, on to the fic. The mer pup squirmed in his small nursery tank as Clark approached and undid the lid. The baby splashed water all over the floor, with smacks of his tail. He kept slithering over himself, making himself into a striped knot of enthusiastic child. He made excited little peeps at Clark, and smiled through his nubby little teeth. When the lid was taken off, the pup tipped himself up onto the lip of the tank and opened and closed his hands in the universal sign for uppies. He was always so excited to get returned back to the main tank.
"Someone has lots of energy today,"
Clark chuckled, petting through the pup's hair. The pup shook his hands off, though, giving it a tiny glare, and more furiously clenching and unclenching his hands. He laughed and gave the pup one last pet.
All right, someone wants to go back to Dad."
The pup was wicked smart, even though he was still very small, and he already recognized the word Dad. Upon hearing it, he instantly perked up and practically screeched with excitement. Clark dipped his hands in, gently placing them under the boy's body and taking him out of the water. The pup's tail instinctively wrapped around Clark's arm, and his tiny claws prickled into his shirt.
"Stay still,"
Clark murmured, because the kid was as slippery as an eel. He hadn't dropped the kid, but he knew that it was only a matter of time, considering his clumsiness and the pup's squiggly excitement. The boy made happy peeps into Clark's ear again, and peered over Clark's shoulder to where the main tanks were.
"Let's get you to Bruce."
Clark padded out, the pup rocking with him, and into the main aquarium space. Bruce had been moved back into his exhibit tank because his escape attempts were massively cut down ever since he began caring for his pup. It only took a couple of takings of the pup for Bruce to get the message that climbing out of the tank resulted in the deprivation of his baby. Clark wasn't sure whether Bruce liked being in the exhibit tank more than the isolation tank. The exhibit tank had much more enrichment, mimicked a natural environment, and was filled with other fish that the pup often chased for entertainment. It was also exposed to the public, though, and for 8 hours a day, people stared at Bruce and his pup. Clark knew that it made Bruce nervous. He could see the signs of stress on Bruce's body. His fins stayed pretty clamped down towards his body. He often paced along the edge of the wall, anxiously swimming the same path. He was never enthusiastic about eating, and absolutely refused to eat where the public could see him. Some of his scales had begun to turn from iridescent black to a dull gray, and his once vibrant fins were losing their bright color. The pup, luckily, didn't seem to mind the public's attention, which was a small miracle, considering that he was the only merchild on display in the country, and probably the most popular sea creature in the world at the moment. Everyone wanted a peek at the adorable pup, who was the only mer born in captivity, even though it was a complete mystery as to how exactly he got there. Diana had been pushing Luther to implement more limited hours, though. She hated seeing the signs of stress on Bruce, and knew that it was contributing to his continued instances of bad behavior. Clark hated even thinking of it as bad behavior now. All he saw was a stressed-out animal acting like a stressed-out animal, and getting his young taken from him as a result of it. He was a father that was trying to be protective of a pup that could be revoked from him at any moment. He was justified when he got panicked and lashed as his pup was pulled away. He didn't understand that acting like that only made his baby get taken away more frequently and for longer. It was a vicious cycle, and Clark could see that it was taking its toll on Bruce. He just didn't want the mer to drown within it. The pup's chirps grew louder as the exhibit came into view, and the surface instantly began rippling. A large black and yellow fin sliced through the calm water and anxiously paced at the edge of the tank. Occasionally, Bruce's head would peek out above the water, and Clark could see his eyes fixed on his pup. He murmured nervous notes, and began putting his hands on the lip of the edge, obviously fighting his urge to pull himself out of the water and get to his pup faster.
Here he is, Bruce,
Clark whispered as he crouched down next to the water and gave the squirming baby back. The pup gracefully slipped into the water, barely making a ripple.
Stay safe and sound. He's all yours again.
The older mer instantly yanked the boy back to his body, drawing them both away from the human and cooing frantically over the pup. The baby was beaming, nuzzling into his father's skin, and accepting every bit of attention that Bruce lavished onto him. Bruce immediately began grooming the pup, the movement caring but also obsessively frantic. If you were looking for it, you could see Bruce's stress in almost everything that he did. Clark sighed and stood, beginning to go through the rest of the mer's morning routine. He filled their food buckets, turned on their day cycle lights, and cleaned out their water filter. He fished out some of the older enrichment items and replaced them with new ones that had fresh treats hidden in the middle of them. Bruce never used the puzzle toys, but his pup took a unique joy out of wriggling his fingers into them and smashing them against rocks.
How are they doing this morning?
Diana's voice startled Clark out of his thoughts, and he almost dropped the full bucket of fish he was moving. From the tank, the pup whistled a greeting note, while Bruce looked silently on.
They're doing fine,
Clark said after catching his breath.
Bruce is being his regular surly self, and the pup is joyful as usual.
Clark paused and tipped his head.
We really need to give him a name.
Dick, Diana said, coming up to the edge of the tank and splashing the water. The pup instantly swam towards her and began nipping at her hands.
Excuse me?
Luther auctioned off the chance to name the pup, and a big donor bought them. She wants to name the pup Dick, after her grandfather. Clark blinked as he watched the pup. Dick, apparently, did a flip in the water.
That's unfortunate.
I think it's hilarious, Diana laughed, clapping as Dick did another complicated twist. You should have seen the look on Luther's face when the donor announced his choice. His face got all red and his egghead started to sweat. It was one of the best moments of my life. Diana playfully wrestled with the pup, tickling his fins and making him giggle. And now we have our sweet little Dickie. Clark snorted and tossed another enrichment toy into the tank. The pup instantly zeroed in on it and chased it as it sunk into the depths of the tank.
What's really up, though, Dee?
He asked as his supervisor stood and smoothed down her t-shirt.
Your shift doesn't start for another hour.
Luther's called me in early. Apparently, he's been planning this large donor event under our noses, and he just told me about it last night. Dick popped up from the water, the small enrichment toy in his mouth. He brought it to Diana, and Diana took it to throw it back into the water. Dick raced after it, his tail paddling after the sinking toy. He's up to something, and whatever it is, he's excited about it. You know how things are when he seems excited about something. Clark grimaced. The last time Luther had been excited, Bruce had gotten his amount of mer encounters doubled.
Yeah, I know how he gets.
Clark met Bruce's eyes from across the tank. The mer gazed at him, emotions unclear, before silently sliding into the water. Within seconds, he had disappeared under the water. The event was beautiful, even though none of the keepers had received any notice about it. Apparently, they were not the designated public-facing staff, and therefore deemed unnecessary, despite their required attendance. To be honest, Clark wasn't even sure why they were there. Diana's presence made sense, given that she was the leader of the MER program, and the head supervisor of anything to do with them. He, Arthur, and Hal, though, were just normal keepers who were more comfortable hauling around feeder fish than standing in this sparkling room answering inane questions about the MERS.
How old is the little one?
A woman asked, pointing at the glass with one hand and balancing a delicate flute of champagne. The event was being held in the guest area of the MERS underwater viewing exhibit space. The area was normally filled with crowds of parents and children and various keeper talks, but all the guest seating had been pushed aside to be filled with expensive dinner tables. High-tier donors, draped in bespoke suits and flowing gowns, floated through the space, lit up in the bright blue glow of the aquarium lights. Bruce and Dick swam through the aquarium, casting the occasional shadow over the donors. Bruce was obviously anxious and stressed by the sudden change in schedule. Usually, at this point in the evening, the lights would be dimmed to mimic night, and he would be able to sleep without being stared at. But today, the lights had remained on, and he was viewed for more hours than he was used to. Dick seemed to pick up on his dad's emotions, and was sticking closer to Bruce than he usually did. He still came up to the glass occasionally, lured in by the women's sparkly dresses and glittering diamond jewelry, but was quick to return to his father when called back.
"We estimate that he's about 4 years old,"
Arthur answered a question, looking into the aquarium and meeting eyes with Bruce.
"We can't be for sure, though, because he was not born at the aquarium, and there isn't a lot of research about growth rates of MERS."
"Is the bigger one the little one's father? They don't look anything alike." Arthur visibly resisted the urge to roll his eyes.
"We believe so. We don't know many details about how Dick came to be, but what we do know is that they're a family now. Bruce is Dick's dad in all ways that matter."
"You don't seem to know much about them."
"They were adopted after they were illegally kept in a private aquarium and abandoned to die when their first owners fled the country. We wish we could have been their first home, but that's not what happened, unfortunately."
The woman was quiet, her finger going around her chin before she hummed. She glided away, heading towards the appetizer table. Arthur sighed and fidgeted next to Clark.
"How long is this thing supposed to go to?" "At least another 2 hours," Clark answered, his hands clasped behind his back. "Luther is supposed to have a big speech soon."
Arthur pouted, which was strange to see on such a large man. His eyes went back to Bruce, who was huddled into a ball, with his fins clamped tight and staring down anyone who dared to look at him. Dick was crawling through the coral structure, though even he was starting to look visibly exhausted.
"Let's hope this is over soon, because I'm not sure how much more of this Bruce is going to tolerate, and I'd love for him to not be a complete demon tomorrow morning."
Clark smiled and shared the feeling. He knew how much of a demon their Mur could be, and that was multiplied by 3 when he was grumpy. They hadn't had a true aggressive bite in 2 months. He desperately didn't want to break Bruce's no-bite streak. It was hell trying to get Bruce into the ISO tank.
"Incoming,"
Hal whispered, jabbing an elbow into Clark's side. Sure enough, Luther's egghead began bobbing through the crowd, and people began noticing him, walking up to the podium at the front of the event space. Beside him, Diana was carrying a wooden box, which she placed on the table next to him once he settled. Diana took a seat near the front, next to their systems manager, Lois, while Clark went to stand in the back with Hal and Arthur.
"Has he told you what this was about? It has to be pretty important for him to gather all the bigwigs together,"
he asked, and Arthur shrugged.
"No, he's just standing there smiling like he's about to announce the second coming of Christ. It's amazing how you can see someone as a prick just by their stance sometimes."
Clark didn't disagree, especially as the man coughed to get their attention, and frowned when people didn't immediately jump to his whims.
"Settle down, I have very important news to announce."
Slowly, the room settled. All of the donors with their tiny cakes and shrimp cocktails found seats and looked at Luther. His shiny bald head glinted blue, and Bruce anxiously swam behind him, trying to get a peek at why everyone had suddenly sat down. Luther smirked and puffed out his chest.
"I would like to show you all the next stage of our aquarium's development. Our insurance that we will have continued success in the future to come. The very reason we have decided to announce the addition of a new aquarium wing onto the east side, complete with a modern, state-of-the-art show arena, an expanded shallows beach with encounter area, and a new aquarium exhibit for our superstar residents."
He lifted a hand. An image of the planned expansion was lit up on the aquarium glass. It showed a beautiful-looking wing, with a wide-open floor plan and modern design accents that would refresh their entire aquarium. The crowd clapped, and Clark clapped along with them. All of that sounded good. Sheila's old tank really was only designed for 1 Mur, and as Dick got bigger, he would begin to outgrow it. Clark definitely liked the idea of keeping them in a new, larger space than being forced to separate them because of limitations.
"That's not all,"
Luther continued, and he motioned for Diana to open the box. He stepped down from the podium and put his hands into the crate. Slowly, he drew out a glass canister, and Clark couldn't help but gasp. It was a mer egg floating in a glass. Clark hadn't seen one since school, during his marine animal incubation course, where they examined different embryos. Mer eggs were leathery and pliable, able to withstand a large amount of pressure. They were also semi-permeable and had to be kept in highly specific water conditions that changed throughout their development. Most of the ones Clark had seen were small and could be mistaken for a shark egg. They supposedly grew larger as they aged, but no one had ever seen one truly reach full maturity or anything close to hatching age. They also didn't know what happened after the egg. No one had ever seen one hatch. No institution had ever been able to keep one alive for more than 2 months. No one had ever gotten close to hatching one, and had a mer birth in captivity. Many mer welfare organizations petitioned for a ban on the sale and acquisition of mer eggs altogether. It was hard to justify their existence when every single egg in captivity died. Well, except... Clark's eyes slid over to Bruce as the mer idly swam through the aquarium. His pup, the only mer pup to have ever been born in captivity, squirmed around him, twisting between the tall crests of Bruce's fins. The older mer definitely seemed tired and annoyed, like he was just waiting for all of this to be over. He either hadn't noticed the egg yet, or he didn't care, and kept swimming with his boy.
"This egg is exceptionally rare," Luther's voice boomed over the speakers, and he held the egg up. "And they are going to be the next adorable member of our happy little family."
The football-sized mermaid's purse rocked inside the glass, and held up to the light, Clark could just barely see the outline of a pup. They were small. Their head was bowed towards the folded arms, almost like they were in prayer. Their waist tapered into a thin tail that looked snake-like without fins. Delicate toothpick bones arched out of their back and their waist, future predictors of large flowing fins. Clark didn't know the species, but he knew it had to be expensive. Fins like that couldn't be anything but expensive. Bruce's tail flicked, and he twisted in turn, but he froze mid-motion. His fins fanned out with surprise, and his eyes popped open. He was obviously startled, but Clark couldn't pick apart his exact emotions, and before he could, Luther was speaking to him.
"Kent,"
he said with a vicious smile. His eyes were sharp enough to cut glass.
"Go introduce our dad to his new kid."
Clark gulped, suddenly so aware of the dozens of eyes that were fixed on him. He could feel his own palms sweating as he stood and stumbled towards Luther. The director shoved the egg into his hands and fixed him in a glare.
"Don't mess this up,"
he hissed, low enough that no one could hear. Clark shivered and nodded, before practically dashing into the back. The beautiful aquarium guest space became a much more utilitarian drainer area. He climbed the stairs up towards the top and looked at the rippling surface. It was calm, only moving with the slight pump of the filter. Did he just dump the egg in? They were extremely reactive to water quality, though. They really should introduce the egg slowly and transition it to a new environment over a period of hours. He had the sinking suspicion that the egg would die within a month. No eggs really made it past the amount of time after being separated from a mother, unless they were monitored hourly in an ISO tank. He couldn't shake the thought that putting this egg immediately into a new environment was putting it into an early grave.
"I'm sorry," Clark whispered to the tiny body. "I wish I knew how to keep you alive."
Then he dipped the egg into the water and watched as it floated for a few seconds, and then began to sink. He sighed and then walked back down the steps and into the gala area so he could watch Bruce's reaction. The charity ball was practically roaring when he returned. The murmur of the crowd had swelled, and voices overlapped with voices as people excitedly watched the egg settle onto the sandy floor. It looked so tiny in the vast tank.
"Has he seen it?"
he asked Arthur and Hal as he went to stand by them. Arthur rolled one of his huge shoulders.
"Oh, he's seen it. He's acting as cautious as he always does, though, and keeping Dick away. He obviously doesn't really understand what's going on."
Bruce floated out from behind a bunch of coral. His fins flared up. The pup was gone, presumably hidden away in some place Bruce considered safe, and the older Mer cautiously approached the egg. The entire crowd waited with bated breath as Bruce circled it, once, twice, before drifting down closer. He picked it up, turned it over, and felt along its leathery casing. His eyes were narrowed in thought. He bit at the edge of his lip, like he always did when he was trying to decide something. Then he held it up to the light, and the embryo was once again illuminated through the egg. The little pup on the inside of it jerked, and Clark could almost imagine that tiny face scrunched up in annoyance. The crowd gasped at the sight of the baby, and a few of the ladies even began clapping. The future looked bright. It looked like Bruce was recognizing the baby for what it was. Everything happened quickly after that. Bruce's face twisted with horror, and he clutched the egg close to his body. His long, flowy fins burst out from him like a cat puffing up a bottle-brush tail. He anxiously thwacked his tail at the bottom of the tank, and sand flew up around him. He bent his body, curling up tightly with his back to the crowd, momentarily shielding the egg from view. When the sand finally settled, and he unwound himself, the egg was gone. Silence filled the room. Bruce laid against the reef floor, his face wrinkled in contemplation, like he was trying to solve a problem. The egg was gone. "He ate it!" came a horrified voice from one of the dinner tables. "He ate the egg!" Someone yelled, and the room erupted into a cacophony of sound. Angry yelling echoed through the room, and even Bruce startled, looking out through the glass and into the crowd.
"He killed it!"
a man shouted, glaring towards Luther, who was looking numbly out into the tank.
"You threw a baby in there with that thing! It's a cannibal!"
The man pointed at Bruce, and Bruce blinked. He tilted his head like a confused dog. Something about the small motion jolted Luther, who whirled and immediately began damage control.
Everyone, please, calm down,"
Luther said into the sound system, his voice barely louder than the appalled mutterings of the donors. "You should have known," said a woman from one of the tables. "You should have never put a child in there with him." Sweat rolled down Luther's egg head.
"Everyone, please, settle down. We assure you that we did our best to research this introduction, and Bruce has never shown any signs of aggression before. He is a very sweet-tempered Mer, which is why he is in our affection section with Sea Life program."
Hal snorted from beside Clark.
"Yeah, he's very gentle and pliant when you shove a pound of Xanax down his throat and threaten to separate him from his kid when he acts up,"
he muttered bitterly. "If he's so sweet, then why did he eat the baby?" Another woman yelled, and Luther stumbled a little bit. Bruce got up from the floor with a flick of his tail, seemed to start going back to Dick. "He's going to eat the other pup!" Someone yelled, and someone screamed.
"He's going on a killing spree! You gotta save the baby!"
Luther kept trying to calm the crowd down, but no one listened. They kept yelling for Dick to be rescued. "Kent! Jordan!" Diana's voice cut through the chaos. "Go up there and get Dick out of the tank. We need to keep them separated until we can figure out what's going on." Clark and Hal startled to attention, but instantly ran up into the back area.
"Do you think Bruce really ate it?"
Hal huffed as he ran around the edge of the tank. He was gathering together one of the tools they used to net large creatures out of the tank.
"I don't know,"
Clark admitted as he pressed a button. It lit up a small light within the tank that signaled they wanted Dick to come to the surface. Both of them were trained to respond to their signal. Bruce did so begrudgingly, but Dick was always very responsive to it, eager to see what kind of snack or toy Clark had for him. Sure enough, Dick almost instantly bobbed to the surface, making excited peeps at Clark and wagging his eel tail. And before he could realize what was happening, Hal snagged him out of the water. Excited peeps immediately turned into distressed whines, and Dick fought, wiggling in Hal's grasp. The pup keened, a high-pitched, oscillating call that immediately put Clark on edge, because he knew exactly who that called. Bruce burst out of the water, lunging toward Hal. Hal jumped back with a little shriek, scrambling to keep the pup in his arms. The older mer slapped against the aquarium floor, his entire body coming out of the water. His muscled body strained as he clawed towards Hal, and his long tail swung behind him. He snarled and flared his fins, razor-sharp claws scraping into the steel floor. He looked seconds away from taking a chunk out of Hal's leg, before Clark stepped in between them.
"Get back in the tank, Bruce,"
he said evenly, keeping his voice purposefully stoic. He didn't show any aggression, but he also made it clear that he wasn't moving. The older mer slapped his tail against the ground in frustration, and the sound rang through the space. He growled, sounding annoyed, and tried to move around Clark. Clark just stopped in his path again, this time pointing towards the water.
"No, Bruce. Water. Get in the water."
His eyes flicked between Clark and the trainer holding his pup, and made a low rumble. The pup chirped in response, hooking his chin over Hal's shoulder. Thankfully, he wasn't whining in distress anymore, and still seemed grumpy, but tolerant of being in Hal's arms. The lack of distress seemed to calm Bruce a bit, who definitely didn't look happy with getting his pup suddenly taken out of the water, but also didn't seem to want to fight now that he knew Dick was fine. His fins relaxed, and he grumbled, but wasn't snarling anymore at least.
"Where is it?"
Luther's shout suddenly rang out, and Bruce's fins immediately shot up again. "Lex, stop!" Diana was running behind him as Luther charged forward towards Bruce. The mer was watching carefully, his eyes widening in fear as the man grabbed one of the metal tools from the wall. He marched towards the mer, arm going back. Bruce scrambled, but he was too far from the water to dive into it, and he was clumsy on land.
"You fucking fish! You ruined every—"
He swung down, and Clark surged forward to catch the metal before it could slam into Bruce's head. Luther immediately rounded on Clark, snarling like an animal.
"Let go, Kent."
"I will not let you hurt him," Clark said evenly, his voice hard as steel.
"I was hired to care for these animals, and I will not let you beat one to death in front of me." "He ruined his chances at—" "He didn't ruin anything, Lex."
Clark cut him off, squeezing the arm in his hand.
"He's an animal. He will do whatever his instincts tell him to do. He doesn't understand."
Clark looked down and saw the mer's eyes staring up at him. Those eyes, blue as the ocean and intelligent, were still animal eyes. He couldn't fool himself into thinking they weren't, no matter how human the body they were attached to was.
"He's just an animal. He doesn't know what he's doing,"
Clark repeated. Luther glared, but eventually gave up, tearing his arm out of Clark's grip.
"I want him in the ISO tank for a week, and then, when he's out, they will be separated."
Diana's face twisted, hating the thought of keeping the father and son apart.
"For how long?" "Indefinitely."
All three trainers shouted, and Luther ignored them to put the tool back on the wall.
"Would you rather we risk Bruce than killing the pup?"
he said, turning back to them.
"Admit it. He's unpredictable, and that means he's a risk for hurting another mer. We also have a PR disaster and a public that's convinced he's going to kill that pup."
He leveled Diana with a stare.
"And admit it, Miss Prince. Can you truly promise me that your mer won't suddenly lash out towards the pup?"
She was silent. They all were. No one could make that promise. Luther flicked his eyes around the room, before straightening and smoothing out his shirt.
"Until we know that he won't hurt the pup, we must keep them separated to minimize the risks. At least until this all blows over. Move the pup into the tank with the sea turtles. We can discuss reintroduction strategies when Bruce is finished with his stay in the ISO tank."
The man walked off, a haughty stance on his shoulders. Bruce glared at him behind his back, then silently slipped back into the dark water of the tank. Diana sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Hal, take Dick over to the West Wing and start getting him set up there."
"Wait, you're not actually going to keep them apart, are you?"
"I hate to say it, but Luther is right. What else can we do? Let's be honest. Bruce is unpredictable, and I refuse to let another pup die because of it." Clark still couldn't shake the thought that this wasn't a good idea. And that is the end of Chapter 2. Author's notes. You can visit my Tumblr at SalParadiseLost, and there's a link there. where I post Tumblr things and general writing musings. I occasionally post drabbles and cutscenes there. I also answer questions about the AU, and who knows, maybe you can have me write a snippet. You can visit JUBE's Tumblr at JUBEArt. Please leave a kudos and comment. Flattery gets you everywhere. And reader's notes for me. Oh, this fic is so... I love this fic so much. I'm thinking, should I put a warning for potential, animal abuse? Child killing? Should I have, added that at the beginning? Yeah, it's probably fine. Also, things aren't quite what they seem. But no spoilers, no spoilers. No spoilers, no spoilers. Yeah, I love this fic. It's so good. So good! Yeah. I'm also recording this way ahead of schedule, so we'll see when I edit and post this. I've been thinking about doing maybe one of these every day in May. Whoa, every day in May. That's too much. What am I saying? Once a week in May. Once every day of the week in May. No, I was thinking of maybe posting this once every week in May for a May kind of thing. But that depends on if I get enough of these stocked up, which other fics take priority over this because I got a schedule going on, but I got ahead on a couple things, so I might have time to do this. We'll see. We'll see. Ignore me recording this at a park, but I think I'm just gonna do the 2 for May because I picked up another fic, which is also a priority, so I'm just gonna keep the regular schedule for this one. Anyways, thank you guys for listening, and bye!